I'm Brian from RC Workboat Haven. Welcome to part 2 of our all-weather ship build. In part 2, we're going to construct railings, we're going to install an accurate motor mount and accurate through-hull holes for the shafts. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. So let's get started. Thanks for watching. Let's start off part 2 by putting railings on this all-weather ship. In order to proceed there, we have to take a look up forward. There is no rib there at this point, so we're going to put one in. We've got a 1/4 by 1/4 inch piece of square stock and mark it here and here and here. I'm going to have to cut a very small piece of 1/8 by 1/8 and glue it right up here. Added 2 little 1/8 square blocks to support the end of the railing strip. Basswood boards that are 4 inches wide by 24 inches long by 1/16 of an inch thick. To clamp this board, take my pencil and mark that board all the way along. So there we go. We have our first piece. Now let's mark this end F for forward. I've modified a small compass by adding a little shaft collar right here onto the pointed end so that now I can slide my pencil along a curve and make a mark. I'm going to go ahead now and cut 4 pieces just like this one. I have the first forward inner railing strip clamped in place. Right at this point, I'm going to make a line halfway through the rib. And this is where the next piece will butt up against the forward piece. We can only go about this far with this section. There'll be 4 pieces because the bend here is going to have to be done in a different way to handle that tight radius. It's a fairly good fit, so I'll cut 4 strips just like that. Make a mark halfway through the rib, and we'll cut that, and then we'll bring the starboard side up to the same stage. Basswood is much stiffer when you try to bend it long ways on the grain. But if you cut a 4-inch section off the bottom of a basswood plank, it's quite flexible going cross-grained. The grains are going in this direction here. So let's put this piece in that corner and mark it. So there is a slight curve to that, and I wouldn't want to just cut a straight piece and try to fit it. I think that we will just cut out 4 pieces to that curve right there. I've added 4 small intermediate 1/8 square blocks between the frames to make sure that there's no distortion when I force it into that bend. The inner railing strip is now in place all the way around the hull. So next step is to glue it all in. it's a bit easier to tip the boat on its side and put a dab of glue where you need it. So here we are. The inner railing is now glued on. So here's the inner railing all glued in place. Turned out quite well. We've already cut the pieces we need to do the exterior sections on the railing. So let's get into that now. So let's start up here at the starboard bow. Clamp it here. Put a clamp down here. I don't see any problems. We should be able to glue that fairly well. There we are. Glue applied here on the inner side. Kind of take a So here's the next piece with glue applied. So there's the starboard side. I'll bring the port side up to the same stage. Next are the flexible cross-cut pieces that will bend and conform around the radius on the stern. So I'll glue this piece in just like that. And finally, a small filler piece that goes right in the transom. So now we have the exterior railing strips glued on. Next step, we'll do the cap on the railing. So here we are the next day. We've got a fairly good looking inside and outside railing strip. I have added a small triangular piece of wood, same thickness as the rail sides, up forward. I'll be filing that out later to a radius. Using 80 grit sandpaper with a fairly long piece of wood, rest the end without sandpaper on the opposite side of the boat and just do a quick sanding here all the way around to help level any imperfections. Right here at the bow, I have filed the railing sides off flush to form a straight angle at the bow. This is our first little piece we'll put on as a little nose cap. We're going to be using 1/16 basswood for the top railing cap. I've clamped the basswood board in position and I'm just going to mark it on the underside. So here's our first piece, our forward railing cap. That will be glued on there ASAP. Using a piece of 1/16 basswood, put a clamp on both ends of the board. And holding it down here, mark the inside, and we have a fairly good looking mark here. So I'll cut that out. Line up the inside edge as well as possible. Don't worry if some part of it is projecting over. It all has to be sanded at the end. Come around to the bow. Put a straight edge in line with the railing nose cap. Make a small line here. And then mark the line against the outside of the railing. And now we can cut that out. So here's the first piece of railing cap in position. We're going to use the same cut and do the port side because the curve will be almost identical, or it should be pretty close, let's hope. So we'll clamp that and repeat the process on the port side. So there's the first two forward sections of the rail cap. The process is just repeated all the way around the boat. And I'll go ahead and do that now, and we'll take a look after we've got the rail cap in position. The railing cap is now in position all across the top of the bulwark. So I'll glue one in next. Here's the starboard forward piece with wood glue. And I'll just follow that up with a few more clamps in here and then continue all the way around the boat. And now the rail cap is all clamped on, and we'll take a look at it tomorrow. The wood glue on the railing cap is now set up, so let's clean up the railing. I'm going to use a file and sandpaper to remove this little edge projecting over the railing side. Using a template, I'm going to mark a small curve right up in the bow. Now I'll file that out to shape. So here's the radius that I've just filed in up on the nose cap. And we're pretty well finished the railing for our all-weather boat. In part one, I had marked out the location for the rudder shaft and the motor shaft. I have drilled out the rudder shaft hole with a 3mm bit. I drilled out the shaft hole with a 3mm pilot bit and then went through with a 5/16 drill bit. For shaft tubes, I'm going to use number 8133 round brass tube available at your local hobby store. The dimensions are 5/16 OD by 0.014 thou wall thickness. The shaft won't quite slide easily through this hole at this point, so I'm going to just file that hole a bit with a small round file. And that seems to be all it takes. I've made a 3-position motor mount from 1/8 by 1.5 aluminum angle. The standard 540 motor has two mounting holes that are 25 millimeters on center, and they accept 3 millimeter bolts. So this lets us mount the motor in 3 different positions. This particular all-weather boat will have the 2-motor configuration, and these motors are placed 3 3/4 inches on center apart. Based on the tugboat experience, the best spot for the after end of the motor mount is 9 1/4 inches in from the keel recess. And I've made a mark at that point. Because we're going to use 2 motors, port and starboard, with shafts that go right through the hull, we have to make sure that our motor mount is correctly positioned this way, and then up and down on the right and left. I've made a small aluminum jig to help me with my motor mount challenge. It's 1 inch by 1 inch by 2 inches solid aluminum block. There's a 5/16 hole drilled to close tolerance that allows the shaft tube to go through. And it has 2 3-millimeter tapped mounting holes that are 25 millimeters apart on center. So here's the mounting block attached to the center of the motor mount, and we have the tube running all the way through the whole jig. This can now be placed through the hole below and slid back to the 9 1/4 mark. So now we have a fairly predictable situation where everything is square. We just have to make sure we have the right height, port and starboard, on this mount. Before I do any more work on the mount, I'm going to just mark the general location with my pencil and scuff up this general area with 80 grit sandpaper so that epoxy will adhere better to it. So I've got a piece of flat bar on the top, and let's measure here, and we have 5 3/8. On this side we have 5 5/16. So we'll file 1/16 off the corner of that aluminum and see if that evens it up. So now we have 5 3/8 minus 5 3/8 minus. Close enough. I've cut 2 small wedges of basswood that will be super glued temporarily just to the underside of the motor mount, so that when I add epoxy, I have a dish for the epoxy to sit in rather than just let it slide all over the place. Here are the 2 small epoxy cribs that I've made, and scuff up the underside of the motor mount with 80 grit. So now we'll mix up this batch of 2-part JB weld and put it into the cribs. And I've also made a mental note of other scratches and scrapes around the scuppers that I'm ready to fill in if I have any extra epoxy left over. I just hate to waste this stuff. It's kind of expensive. Okay, so let's get our mount. Put it in position. And just work it right over the top like that. So there we go, the all-weather mount for the all-weather ship. There's a couple right in here that we might as well clean our knife off on. At this point, I want to be careful I just don't create a whole lot of extra work for myself. It's a lot easier to put on than it is to take off. So that's as far as we go with this batch, but we've got the main objective done. We're going to have a super solid motor mount down there. So now I've relocated the shaft tube guide to the starboard outer motor position. So now I can slide my shaft tube in perfect alignment until it just touches the hull right here. And I'm going to make a mark here and here. Using a semi-straight edge, I'm going to make a rough mark here. That's the top of the shaft tube. This is the bottom of the shaft tube. So I'll mark on the other side these two areas, and I'll just rough that up with 80 grit in that area. Now I'm going to make a more careful mark exactly where the shaft hits the hull. So there's one mark here. Now we're going to get our little semi-straight edge, slide it along, and make another mark here. And so now we have two marks. Now we're going to get the edge here and make a mark. And on the other side of the shaft tube, we'll make a mark. Now I'll set it up on the port side and we'll see what the alignment looks like. Not too bad. So I'll go ahead and drill pilot holes. Four little holes with a 2mm bit. And then follow it up with a 5/16 bit. I'm using a piece of hacksaw blade held with a pair of small vice grips to cut out hole to hole following a line. And that's it. So here are the two cutouts, and from here it's just a matter of filing the corners here until we can get the shaft to come out from the shaft guide and slip nicely through these two openings. Now from the inside, I'm going to carefully file the sides of the cutout until the shaft just barely clears and goes right through the hull. Here's the port side shaft hole cut out. It's done to a fairly close tolerance, and the shaft tube slides through easily. So doing an accurate job at this stage is going to help me later when I go to install the actual shaft tubes. I'll bring the starboard side up to the same stage. So this is the end of part 2 of our all-weather ship build. We're going to build this beauty step by step. Please don't miss part 3. Subscribe today. Thanks for watching.